if you leave like a $32,000 stack of pristine cash just totally untouched in a locked, abandoned truck out in the wilderness, you haven't just, created a crime scene. You've essentially broken the human brain's ability to process logic.
Yeah, it completely shorts out our mental wiring. Because, I mean, every assumption we make about motive, like a robbery or maybe a drug deal gone wrong, it suddenly evaporates the second you see that money just sitting there.
It's wild. Welcome to
Yeah.
the Deep Dive. Our mission today is exploring the anatomy of secrets, the limits of human logic, and really the grueling pursuit of the truth.
Right, and we're looking at two incredibly fascinating yet seemingly distinct sources today to do that.
Yeah, exactly. First, we are looking at this massive crowdsourced collection. It's this sprawling Reddit thread that documents the most bizarre, totally unexplained deaths and disappearances that keep true crime buffs awake at night.
And we are pairing that with a very dense, very exhaustive legal summary of New York State's Freedom of Information Law, or FOIL, case rulings.
Which sounds completely disconnected at first, right?
Oh, at first glance, internet ghost stories and administrative case law seem like they belong in, well, totally different universes.
Yeah, completely.
But they're really two halves of the exact same coin. We are looking at the raw human desire to solve an impossible puzzle, and then examining the complex and often frustrating legal machinery that dictates whether you are even allowed to possess the puzzle pieces in the first place.
So I'm speaking directly to you right now. You have almost certainly gone down a late-night internet rabbit hole, reading about a cold case, wondering what exactly the police know that they just aren't telling us.
We all have. You can't help it.
Right. You wonder what the government is legally allowed to hide from you. Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how we eventually extract the official facts, we first have to understand the anatomy of a cold case.
Yes, we need to look at what makes a mystery so haunting that people spend, decades demanding the files.
Exactly. And looking at this crowdsourced thread, there are standard crimes and then there are, structural anomalies.
The cases that truly linger in the public consciousness, they aren't just tragic. They defy basic causality.
Yeah.
They present physical evidence that contradicts the laws of physics or medical science as we currently understand them. The Ray Rivera case is a primary example from the source material.
Oh, wow. Let's talk about Ray Rivera, because I actually remember reading about this one.
It's a baffling one.
It really is. He was found dead in the historic Belvedere Hotel in Baltimore, right? Having crashed through the roof of a lower annex.
That's right.
And the prevailing theory, the one that makes geographical and geometric sense, is that he jumped or was dropped from a really significant height, like maybe a helicopter or the main roof of the hotel.
Right, that was the initial thought.
But looking closely at the source material, there are massive physical contradictions there, right?
Enormous ones. First, just logistically, a helicopter hovering over a busy populated hotel at the estimated time of death would generate a massive amount of noise and, wind.
And nobody heard anything.
Nobody reported anything like that at all. But the detail that completely upends the logic of a simple fall, well, it's buried in the autopsy report.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The official cause of death wasn't just blunt force trauma from suddenly hitting a roof. A major contributing factor was actually sepsis.
Wait, sepsis? Like a severe blood infection?
Exactly. Sepsis caused by a catastrophic abdominal blow. And here is where the mechanics of the human body just totally destroy the prevailing theory.
Okay, how so?
Because sepsis does not happen instantly upon impact. It is a biological process. It requires days to develop as the infection spreads through the bloodstream.
Oh, wow. So if he died with sepsis already raging in his system,
Right.
he couldn't have just fallen from a roof and died on impact? The timeline is totally wrong.
The medical reality suggests a completely different narrative. It implies he was severely beaten, sustained a massive abdominal injury, survived somewhere else for days while developing this systemic infection, and only later was his body placed or thrown into that hotel annex.
That turns a static, falling body into a moving, multi-day crime scene. It completely shatters the initial picture. Like finding a jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces are missing, and the ones you do have belong to a completely different picture.
That's a perfect analogy.
And it's not just modern forensics that do this. The historical cases in our source material, they are deeply unsettling because of these tiny, jarring behavioral details.
Oh, absolutely.
Take the Villisca axe murders of 1912. 8 people, including 6 children, were killed in their sleep with a blunt end of an axe. The house was locked from the inside.
Right, a locked room mystery.
But the killer didn't just flee. They took the time to meticulously cover every single mirror and window in the house. And they left a kerosene lamp on the floor next to one of the victims, but they actually took the time to roll the wick down to exactly a quarter of an inch.
It implies a terrifying level of calm and deliberation. Or consider the 1902 case of Nora Fuller in San Francisco. A 15-year-old girl answers a newspaper ad for a nanny job. But the address listed in the newspaper ad, it's just a vacant dirt lot.
That is incredibly creepy.
And a month later, she is found dead in a rented house. The man who rented it, using a fake name, had specifically instructed a local furniture store to deliver only a bed and a single chair to that room, nothing else.
It feels incredibly staged, like theatrical almost.
Yes, very calculated.
And we see that same weird staging in the Dorothy Jane Scott case. She is stalked for months, kidnapped from a hospital parking lot. Her stalker torments her family with phone calls for years.
Which is horrific on its own.
Right, but when her remains are finally discovered 4 years later, they burned, but they are buried right alongside the remains of a dog.
Right.
Why a dog? Who brings a dog to a murder disposal site and buries it alongside the victim?
What's fascinating here is the psychological mechanism at play. Why do these specific details stick in our minds so intensely?
Yeah, why do they bother us so much?
We are fundamentally pattern recognition machines. From an evolutionary standpoint, human survival depended on looking at a complex environment, like a dense forest, and instantly spotting the break in the visual pattern.
Like spotting the hidden predator in the brush.
Exactly. When we consume a true crime story, our brains subconsciously build a familiar narrative pattern. Motive, means, opportunity, escape.
So a standard robbery makes sense. A crime of passion makes sense.
But when you introduce an anomaly, $32,000 left in an abandoned truck, an unharmed dog buried with a victim, a kerosene wick rolled down to a precise quarter inch, it radically disrupts that pattern.
It just doesn't compute.
It creates profound cognitive dissonance. Our brains literally cannot file the memory away as resolved. The narrative loop stays open, constantly searching for the missing piece of context that makes the picture make sense.
Wow.
That unresolved biological loop is exactly why these cases keep people awake at night.
So when the internet sleuths, the journalists, or, the victims' families, hit a brick wall and those Reddit theories run completely dry, the natural next step is demanding the official files.
Yeah, the paper trail.
People want the police reports, the unredacted autopsy photos, the interrogation transcripts. They want the truth straight from the source.
But transitioning from the internet rabbit hole to the official government record, well, that introduces a completely different type of mystery.
Right.
Asking the government for the truth and legally forcing them to actually hand it over are two wildly different things.
Which brings us to our second source. This deep dive into New York State's Freedom of Information Law case rulings. Because you can't just walk into a police precinct and casually ask for the Dorothy Jane Scott file.
No, definitely not.
You have to file a formal legal request. And historically speaking, massive government agencies aren't exactly thrilled to hand over thousands of pages of internal documents to a random citizen.
Far from it. They usually fight it tooth and nail. But this is where the foundational mechanics of FOIL are so crucial. In landmark court cases like Data Tree and Gould, the courts established a very specific rule regarding the burden of proof.
Okay, how does that work?
The government cannot simply ignore you, and they cannot simply say no because they don't feel like it. The law operates on the presumption that public records belong to the public.
That makes sense.
So if a government agency wants to keep a document secret, the burden of proof is entirely on them. They have to prove to a judge exactly which legal exemption applies and demonstrate the specific harm that would be caused by releasing it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I want to push back on that a little bit, or at least play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
Let's say I ask for a massive, complex murder investigation file. The police don't want to release it. Can't they just point to a towering filing cabinet and say, hey, that whole thing is confidential, and slam the door shut?
No, and the courts have been extremely aggressive about striking that exact tactic down. That's what we call a blanket denial.
Okay.
The source material highlights cases, like Brown v. Yalom, involving murder investigation files, where the police essentially tried to slap a giant confidential sticker on an entire box of records.
And the court said no.
The courts ruled that is illegal. The agency is legally required to review that file document by document, page by page and sometimes line by line to justify the secrecy of each individual piece of paper.
Wow, think about the sheer labor involved in that.
Yeah.
Having to legally justify every single sheet of paper in a 30-year-old cold case file.
It is a massive undertaking, and if one page has sensitive witness information, they can redact that one page, but they cannot use that one page to hide the other 500 pages in the box.
That is a huge win for transparency. But surely the ultimate trump card for the police is just to say, hey, we are still looking into this. It is an ongoing investigation. Doesn't that just kill a FOIL request instantly?
It is absolutely the most common defense used by law enforcement. They cite the exemption for records compiled for law enforcement purposes. But again, the courts have placed very strict mechanical limits on that excuse.
Really? Like what?
Rulings in cases like Legal Aid and Dawkins clarify that the ongoing investigation shield has a firm expiration date.
Oh, interesting.
Once a criminal trial has concluded or the formal discovery phase is complete, that excuse just evaporates. The government cannot hide behind closed or completely dormant cases forever.
Good to know.
Once the immediate result to a prosecution is gone, the legal machinery forces the facts out of the dark.
So blanket denials are out, and the ongoing investigation excuse eventually expires. But reading through these New York FOIL cases, it is obvious the government still possesses some incredibly powerful, highly specific legal shields. Like they still manage to keep a lot of information away from the public.
They do.
Yeah.
And this is where the judicial system has to perform a highly delicate balancing act. And I think it is important to note here, as we discuss these law enforcement surveillance cases, that we are looking strictly at the legal mechanics.
Right, just the facts.
Exactly. We are impartially analyzing how the courts weigh transparency against institutional safety. The judges aren't taking political sides. They are applying a rigid framework to complex situations where both sides have, very valid concerns.
A perfect example of that legal framework in action is something in the sources called the Glomar response.
Yes, this came up in a major case, Abdur Rashid, regarding NYPD surveillance records.
I read this and it sounded like a riddle. Someone asked for surveillance records, and the police didn't say yes, and they didn't say no. They responded by saying they could neither confirm nor deny the existence of the records. How is that a legal answer?
Think of it like a home security system.
Okay.
If a burglar approaches your house and asks, do you have a hidden camera in the hallway? If you say no, you just told them exactly where they can sneak in undetected.
Right, obviously.
But if you say yes, you just told them exactly where they need to go to spray paint the lens. The only way to protect the integrity of the security system is to refuse to acknowledge whether the camera even exists.
I see. That makes perfect sense.
In the context of counterterrorism or covert surveillance, simply confirming that a file exists could tip off a target. If you ask the FBI for your file and they reply, we can't release it because it's part of an active investigation, they've just confirmed you are actively being investigated.
They gave away the secret by trying to keep it secret.
Exactly. The court allows the Glomar response to protect the methods of the intelligence network rather than just hiding specific facts.
They're protecting the instruction manual, basically.
Yes.
And we actually see that exact concept, protecting the manual, pop up, again regarding police training materials. But the courts apply it in a really fascinating, specific way. In a case called DISM, someone used AOIL to request the state police manuals on how they conduct wiretapping. The court allowed the police to keep those manuals hidden, stating that because the techniques were non-routine, making them public would allow, quote, miscreants to tailor their activities to evade detection.
But we have to contrast that wiretap ruling with another case called Capruso. In that instance, someone requested the training manuals for how police use radar speed detection guns.
Okay, so another police manual.
The police tried to hide those manuals using the exact same argument they used for the wiretaps. They claimed it would help people evade detection, but the court completely rejected that argument and forced them to hand the radar manuals over.
Wait, why? The different outcome. They are both police methods.
It comes down to the underlying mechanism of secrecy. Radar guns are routine, everyday technology. More importantly, the court noted that the manuals for radar speed detection are, quote, freely traded in public commerce.
Meaning anyone can get them.
You can literally go online and buy the instruction booklet from the manufacturer. You cannot legally claim a technique is a sensitive secret government method if any citizen can order the manual on the internet.
Right. The secret's already out.
Exactly. The law forces the government to prove that the secrecy actually serves a legitimate protective purpose and isn't just an arbitrary refusal.
Okay, so they can protect covert surveillance networks and highly specialized wiretap methods. But if they can hide their methods, what happens when police officers themselves are involved in a crime? How does the Freedom of Information law handle internal accountability?
This is where we run into Section 58 of the Civil Rights Law. For a long time, this was a massive shield used to keep police personnel and disciplinary records out of public view.
Why was it there in the first place?
It was initially designed to prevent defense attorneys from using minor internal infractions just to harass officers on the witness stand. But a specific hit-and-run case in the sources exposed a fascinating mechanical loophole in that shield.
Oh, right, the Hearst case.
Yeah.
A state trooper was involved in a hit-and-run while off duty. The press filed a FOIA request demanding the internal investigation records. And the state police tried to withhold the documents, arguing they were personnel records used to evaluate the trooper's performance and therefore fully exempt from disclosure.
But there was one crucial detail that changed the legal physics of the case. The trooper had already resigned from the force.
Which means there is no performance left to evaluate.
Precisely. The court ruled that because the employment had ended, those records could no longer possibly be used to evaluate his continued employment or promotion.
So the shield just drops.
The legal justification for the shield vanished the moment he handed in his badge, and the court forced the internal investigation into the light. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see the law constantly wrestling between two immense competing forces:
Yeah, sure.
protecting institutional safety so the government can actually function, and enforcing institutional accountability so the public actually knows what the government is doing.
It is a massive tug of war. But it's not just about protecting police tactics or holding government agencies accountable. Reading through these cases, a staggering portion of FOL case law is actually a massive, desperate struggle over personal privacy.
Yes, absolutely.
In this quest for the truth about a cold case or a crime, when does the public's right to know cross the line and violently violate a regular citizen's right to simply be left alone?
That is the privacy paradox, and the courts treat it as arguably the most sensitive area of public records law. Let's look at the Bursack case, the Wall of Shame.
Oh, this one was wild.
A county executive decided to take the names and mugshots of people arrested for DWI and publish them on a county-run website designed specifically to shame them.
But wait, if someone is arrested, that arrest record is a public document. If I file a FOIL request for a DWI arrest, they have to give it to me. So if the records are public anyway, why does the format matter?
Because of how the information is being weaponized, the court ordered the county to take the website down immediately. They ruled that actively broadcasting those records in that specific, humiliating format created a permanent, limitless notoriety.
They called it stigma plus, right?
Yes, the legal term was stigma plus. It violated the individual's constitutional due process rights. It is one thing for the law to allow a curious citizen to request a specific record. It is an entirely different legal universe for the government to actively weaponize that record against a citizen's privacy.
And those privacy protections become absolute ironclad walls when you are dealing with victims or medical data. The source material shows, in cases like Fapiano and Carlin, that courts will universally block any records that could identify the victim of a sex offense.
Exactly.
They refuse to allow that personal trauma to become public fodder for amateur sleuths.
And medical privacy is fiercely guarded, even when the data seems totally harmless. Look at the Hannig case regarding a driver's license application or the Hasek Cancer Registry case. The Cancer Registry is perhaps the most illustrative example of how deeply judges have to understand the mechanics of data.
Tell me about that one.
Someone requested data from the state cancer registry for a specific county. They were doing environmental research, looking for links to cancer clusters. They explicitly did not ask for any names. They only wanted the zip codes, the dates, and the types of cancer diagnosed.
Well, that sounds completely anonymous.
Right. But the Department of Health denied the request anyway, and the court upheld that denial. Why? Because the court understood how reverse engineering works in the modern era.
What do you mean?
Imagine a small, rural zip code with maybe 1,000 people. The data set says one person, a female aged 40 to 45, was diagnosed with a highly specific, rare form of bone cancer in 2018.
Oh, I see. If you live in that town, you know exactly who that is.
You remember who missed work for months. You remember who lost their hair. You remember who the community held a fundraiser for. In a small data pool, anonymity is an illusion.
It's basically an open secret at that point.
A researcher could easily cross-reference that quote-unquote anonymous data point with a Facebook post or a local obituary and instantly reverse engineer the patient's identity. The court recognized that risk, and they protected the patient's medical privacy over the researcher's curiosity.
But there are moments where those walls of privacy finally come down, right? Where transparency wins out over the right to be left alone.
Yes, but the circumstances have to be exact. Look at the Herald Company case involving a murder-suicide, detailed in the FOIL summaries. The state police tried to withhold the entire investigation file, citing the privacy of the people involved.
Right.
But the court forced them to hand it over in its entirety.
Why in that case?
Two reasons. First, the perpetrator was dead, and under the law, the deceased have significantly diminished privacy rights. You can't defame or embarrass someone who is no longer alive.
That makes sense.
But secondly, and most importantly, the family of the victim actively wanted the records released. They were publicly calling for full disclosure to understand what happened. The court weighed the diminished privacy of a deceased shooter against the agonizing desires of a surviving family and decided that in this specific equation, transparency won.
So what does this all mean? It means that when you are sitting in the dark at 2 a.m., scrolling through a true crime thread about the Jameson family's missing cash, or Dorothy Jane Scott's bizarre burial, and you are frustrated by the missing information, that void isn't always a malicious government cover-up.
Right.
Sometimes that missing piece of the puzzle is the direct result of a judge sitting in a quiet courtroom, deciding that a victim's dignity or a family's peace or a patient's medical privacy simply matters more than our morbid curiosity.
This raises an important question, though. How do we legally define what is a matter of significant interest to the general public? Who actually gets the moral authority to decide if a teenager's tragic death is a strictly private family matter or a public puzzle meant to be dissected by millions of strangers on the internet?
It's a huge burden.
The Freedom of Information Law attempts to create an objective mechanical standard, but at the end of the day, it relies entirely on human judges making highly subjective, agonizing moral calculations.
It really does. We started this deep dive looking at the visceral, deeply unsettling details of unsolved Reddit mysteries. The kerosene wick rolled down to a quarter-inch, the fake nanny ad leading to an empty room, the structural anomalies that break our brain's pattern recognition and loop in our imaginations.
Yeah.
And then we moved into the complex, rigid legal machinery of avoil case law, the burden of proof, the Glomar response, the privacy paradox. We traced the journey from the emotion of the unknown to the mechanics of extracting the known.
It is an incredible human ecosystem.
So the next time you read about a cold case online, or you see a breaking news story based on quote-unquote unsealed government documents, you will understand exactly what it took to get those words on your screen.
Absolutely.
You'll understand the massive, invisible legal tug-of-war between democratic transparency, institutional safety, and deeply personal privacy that had to take place just to get those facts out of a locked filing cabinet and into the light of day.
And that leaves us with one final, frankly, terrifying thought to consider.
Okay, what's that?
Throughout this entire discussion, we have been talking about human limitations. Human internet sleuths struggling to connect a few disparate dots, human police officers trying to protect their methods, human judges agonizing over the delicate balance of law and privacy.
Right. It's all human-driven right now.
But we are rapidly entering an era where artificial intelligence can automatically process every single public record, every unsealed court transcript, every FYL disclosure, and every obscure Reddit theory, all simultaneously. When an AI can instantly cross-reference a century of fragmented, supposedly anonymous data in a fraction of a second, well, will this technology finally solve the bizarre mysteries that our human brains couldn't process?
That is wild to think about.
Or, by its very nature, will its ability to instantly connect every single dot completely obliterate the very concept of government secrecy and personal privacy forever?
That is a staggering thing to think about. Next time you're staring at a mystery wondering where the missing pieces of the puzzle are, just remember someone, somewhere, had to build a legal wall to keep them hidden. And something else might be about to tear that wall down. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.